proud of that. I don't know. All right, so back in the...
Yeah, sounds like that might have been said many times.
A few times. It's a great source of satisfaction and pride. All right, so back in the slides packet now, off of the math worksheet for a second. So how many approaches to value have we covered?
2.
We've covered 2, right? We've covered 2. There are 3 total. We've covered 2. We've covered the sales comparison approach, which is the one with doing the adjustments up and down. That's the CMA, right? We do that on residential property and vacant land. We just finished the cost approach, which is the one that we use to value what kind of property? Special use property. And so what does that leave us with? What kind of property have we not yet valued? Income, commercial property, income producing property. And income producing property is going to be valued based on how much income it produces. The more income it produces, the more valuable the piece of property is. Luckily for you guys, you already know the biggest piece of data that you need in order to complete these math questions, because you've already learned that big long math formula for calculating before tax cash flow. Does everybody remember that? Well, we're not going to go all the way to the bottom of that formula. We're going to stop about 2/3 of the way down at net operating income. Because when we use the income approach to value, we use net operating income as our guide. The more net operating income the property produces, the more valuable it is. And here's why we use net operating income and not before tax cash flow. Remember, what's the difference between those two? What gets you from NOI to before tax cash flow? What do you subtract out to get there? The debt service, right? It's NOI minus debt service equals before tax cash flow. If we were trying to value 2 properties that were pretty much identical and produce the same amount of income, shouldn't they have the same value? Does that make sense for you guys? Well, if we use before tax cash flow, how much they would be valued at would be based on whether or not you had a loan on them, because that would impact the before tax cash flow. Does that make sense for everybody? So we don't use before tax cash flow. What we use is NOI, because the NOI for those 2 properties would be the same whether they have a mortgage or not. And then we use something called a capitalization rate, which is just the same thing as a rate of return. That's all it is. So NOI divided by capitalization rate will give us the value of the property. Strictly a math question. The income capitalization is probably the most straightforward one of the 3 on the test, because there's no thinking involved. It's literally just, let me get the NOI, let me get the capitalization rate, let me divide the 2. And that'll give you the value of the property. It's just following a T-bar. So here's an example. It says an investment property has the following characteristics. 50 units that rent for $800 each monthly. Well, that word monthly is like a red flag for us when we're dealing with this formula, because everything needs to be what? Annual. Annual vacancy rates that equal 8% of the gross potential income, 10% property management fee, annual property taxes of $30,000, and other operating expenses of $58,000. And it says if similar investment properties have generated a capitalization rate of 9.3%, what's the estimated value of the property? Well, if you look at that formula again, the value of the property is going to be equal to the net operating income divided by what? The net operating income divided by the capitalization rate. The value of the property is equal to NOI divided by capitalization rate. Well, they gave us the capitalization rate, didn't they? They told us the capitalization rate was what? 9.3%. So we don't need to do any work at all for the capitalization rate. Does everybody see that? What they didn't give us was the what? The NOI. We don't know the net operating income, but did they give us all the information we need to get to the NOI? Yeah. Yep. And so that's going to be our next step, is to calculate the NOI on this thing. So the NOI, that formula that you already have gotten memorized. And so this is what it's going to look like. Our gross potential income, 50 units times $800 a month, times 12 months a year, that's $480,000 in gross potential income. Does everybody see where that one comes from? And then we subtract our vacancy, and they told us we had 8% vacancy, so that left us with a gross effective income of $441,600. Are we all good on that number? Okay, so this should be just a review pretty much. NOI is going to be our gross effective minus all of our operating expenses. Well, we've got a 10% management fee, that's $44,160. We got property taxes of $30,000 and other operating expenses of $58,000. So our NOI is $309,440, and we can stop. Oops, sorry, hit the wrong button. We can stop right there. We can stop in NOI. We don't need to go any further. We don't need to go all the way down to before tax cash flow. If they had given us a debt service payment, what would you do with it? Cross it out, ignore it, right? Because it's past NOI. So now our math just becomes $309,440, the NOI, divided by the capitalization rate of 9.3%, and that gives this property a value of $3,327,000 and some change. That's pretty straightforward, right? If you're comfortable with the NOI formula, you'll be very comfortable doing this kind of a math question. Okay? So let's go back over to the worksheet, because that's all the slides for they get less and less lecture as we go along. Like the sales comparison approach takes a long time to talk our way through it. The cost approach is kind of medium, and then income capitalization is like, okay, here's your T-bar. That's all you got. And so it's pretty straightforward on this one. So look at number 17 here. 17 asks you to calculate the property's before tax cash flow. Can we do that? Yep, we can. So let's do that. I'm going to write the formula out first. Gross potential income. Gross potential income minus my vacancies equals gross effective income. By the way, I had to stop doing this down in the middle of the screen. I had to start doing it to the left because Michelle had a meltdown the other night. So I was like, she said it helped her if I kept it all lined up one way. So I said, you got it. That's what we're going to do. All right. So GPI minus vacancy equals gross effective income minus our operating expenses equals what?
NOI.
NOI. And minus debt service equals before tax cash flow. Alright, so there's our full formula. And if you wanted to like draw lines, you can separate things. I have to keep doing that. It's got a mind of its own today. Keep it separate, we can do that. Okay, let's fill in the information. Alright, 80 units are rent for $700 per month. Okay, so that's going to go on my gross potential income line. 80 times 700 times 12. Just making notes for myself. An average of 5 units per month were vacant, so that's going to be vacancy of 5 units times 700 times 12. Is everybody okay with that? And an additional $3,500 in rent was not collected from tenants for the past year, so that's also going to go on my vacancy line here, $3,500. Get rid of that. Annual expenses included the following: a management fee of 10% of the effective gross income. All right, so we got a 10% management fee here on the operating expenses. We got property taxes of $45,000. That's also an operating expense. We got utilities of $60,000. That's also an operating expense. Maintenance of $35,000. That's an operating expense. Debt service of $180,000. That comes down here on the debt service line. And then finally, And then finally, other operating expenses of $70,000. So I got all my notes in place, I can do my math now. All right, so gross potential income, 80 units times $700 a month times 12 months. Looks like $672,000 to me for gross potential. Sound about right? And then the vacancy, 5 units per month times $700 per month, or 5 units times $700 a month times 12 months, minus $42,000 in vacancy, plus the other $3,500. So we got total losses of $45,500. Is everybody okay with that? And then that's going to give me a gross effective of $626,500. Now, we want to get rid of all of our operating expenses. Got a 10% management fee minus $45,000 minus $60,000 minus $35,000 minus $70,000. $353,850. Does that sound about right for an NOI? Is that right? $353,850 for NOI. Because the total expenses were $272,650 in total expenses. So we got NOI of $353,850 minus debt of $180. And that leaves us with a before tax cash flow of $92,650. Are we all okay with that number? Does that sound about right? Y'all check me on the math. Good? No?
353 minus 180.
153,
Yeah.
850 minus 180 is not 92.
Yeah, you're right about that. Thank you. That's why I asked. I can make key mistakes for the best of them. 353,850 minus 180. I don't know what I typed. How about 173,850?
It's more better.
173,850. All right, for before tax cash flow. So that takes care of that question. Now the next question, keep in mind it may be setting you up for failure. In question 12 above, what would the value of the property be if the prevailing capitalization rates in the area is 9.6%? Well, for value of a property, our T-bar looks like this. On top goes what? NOI, and on the bottom goes the cap rate. Right?
Bottom right.
Yep, that's what I'm doing. And then that'll give us the value of the property. So it's NOI that we need, not cash flow, to answer this. And our NOI is $353,850. So it's $353,850 over a cap rate of 9.6%. And that is a value of $3,685,937.50.
Yes, you set me up for failure.
Did you use that before tax cash flow? Yeah. Yeah.
But then I went back and checked, but I was like, oh, that's right.
Yep. And that's what you have to be careful with, because on some of these questions they are going to give you enough information to get all the way to before tax cash flow, but you have to recognize that value doesn't use before tax cash flow. Value uses what? NOI. NOI. So you got to know when to stop. When's enough's enough. You know? Make sure you stop at NOI to calculate the value. All right. Go ahead and do number 19. Actually, work on 19 and 20.
We're gonna do 20.
Yeah, go ahead and do 20 as well. Yeah, that's the toughest thing about that one is that wording there, including the property management fee. It's already there. It's already there. So really that question is testing as much on, do you know that the property management fee is an operating expense? Because that's a very common thing where people sort of somehow forget that that is an operating expense. So yeah, I ended up with total, I mean basically the one I had to calculate here was the gross potential income. So 446,400 on gross potential income, and then once I subtracted the 6% vacancy, that left me with a gross effective of 419,616. And then I just subtracted the $185,000 that they gave me for operating expenses, which leaves me with an NOI of 234,616. And you can plug that into the formula, divide by 9%, and it gives you a value of $2,606,844 and some pennies. And it looked like everybody was completely on the right track there. I mean, even those of you that didn't have it completely right were like instantly, as soon as I pointed out something, you're like, oh yeah, okay, what's up?
All was gonna ask how many people missed the word included.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about. It was a couple.
How many missed it?
I saw at least 2.
I did.
Yeah, so 3 of you.
I was
Yeah.
just picking the bullet points and getting ready to.
Right, and that's the thing, you know, it makes a difference, because if you just see 10% property management fee, but miss that it's already included.
I put it right on my line.
Yep. Yep. Okay, well, are we all good on this one? All right, and I think everybody had number 20 right. Number 20 is one of those ones that, like, you feel like you're in for a long haul, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is easy, right? And because they gave you both pieces of information you needed. They gave you a lot of information you didn't need here, but ultimately, because they're asking you to calculate the value of the property, we know we just need the NOI and the cap rate, and they gave us both of those things. They gave us the NOI of $118,000. They gave us the cap rate. We didn't have to calculate any of that, and so therefore the value of the property is $1,275,000. And so the reason I give you an example like that is sometimes they'll do that on a test because sometimes people shut down if they feel like they can't fill in every line. Like they write that big long formula out, and it's like they get to, with undetermined amount of vacancy. Well, some people just shut down right there. They just stop. Well, if it's undetermined, how can I do it? Well, because they kind of gave you everything else as you went, because even you didn't need the vacancy for a couple reasons. Number one, they also gave you gross effective income, so that's after vacancy. But then they gave you NOI. I'm like, oh man, I don't need to do anything here. So make sure you're good on that question as well. We all feel okay on those? I think everybody was right on number 20 that I saw. Last thing, and then we're done with value. We've covered it all in one day. That's pretty impressive. You guys should feel good about that. Or feel miserable about it, one of the two. I don't know which it is. Alright, so back over to the slides. There's one little tweak on the income capitalization approach called the gross rent multiplier. Now this is used for specific type of income producing property. This is when you own residential property as income producing property. So if you have a house, for example, that you rent out, or a duplex that you rent out, you really can't come up with a value of it using the income capitalization approach, because you really can't come up with a net operating income for that kind of a property. The problem with that kind of a property is the NOI fluctuates way too much. When you're talking about one single house, then 1 month of missed rent would throw your NOI way. Does that make sense? Like it's such a huge chunk of your income. Or one major repair. If you had to replace the HVAC system, would that throw your NOI off for the whole year on that property? So when we're talking about residential property, we don't use the income capitalization because it's too specific. We just use a quick down and dirty method called the gross rent multiplier. The gross rent multiplier is just the number of months it takes to get your money back at the current rent. In other words, how long is it going to take me to get my money back? If I rent it for the same thing it's rented for right now, it would take me 100 months to get my money back. Well, how could I shorten that number? What could I do? Raise the rent or pay less for the property. Either way, wouldn't that shorten the amount of time it would take me to get my money back? So gross rent multiplier, the formula just looks like this. It's just the purchase price divided by the monthly rent. And it's the one time we use monthly rent. With a gross rent multiplier, we use monthly rent. So it's just purchase price or value divided by monthly rent. Well, if they ask you for the value, what does the formula say you would do? They're asking for the value piece.
Multiply gross rent.
Gross rent multiplier times what? Times the monthly rent. That's right. The value would be the gross rent multiplier times the monthly rent. The gross rent multiplier would be the value divided by the monthly rent. The monthly rent would be value divided by gross rent multiplier. As long as you memorize the formula, you won't have a problem at all with these. So here's an example question. And they really can't get much harder than this, honestly. A rental home generates monthly income of $1,450. if the owner investor purchased a home for $172,000, what is the gross rent multiplier? Well, the T-bar says the gross rent multiplier is equal to the value or purchase price divided by what? It's equal, the gross rent multiplier is what we're trying to calculate. So what is that equal to? What are the other two things that are left? If I'm trying to calculate this one, value divided by monthly rental rate. Exactly. So how much is the value of this property? $172,000. And how much is the monthly rental rate? $1,450. So it's just 172,000 divided by 1,450. And that is a gross rent multiplier of 118.62. That's the number of months it would take to get our investment back in that property at the current rental amount. Now, it doesn't take into account any expenses or anything like that. It's just a quick, easy, shortcut method to compare rental property.
What's a good time frame?
So what's a good gross rent multiplier? Well, let me ask you this way. Gross rent multiplier, higher or lower better?
Lower.
What do you think? Higher or lower gross rent multiplier better? Lower, because this is a number of months. This is time. So you'd like to get your money back quicker, right? Generally speaking, anything less than 100 is pretty good. Anything less than 100. So could you figure out what you need to raise the rent to get your money back in 100 months here? You could take the value, 172, and divide by what? 100. And that would tell you what your monthly rent would need to be to get your investment back in 100 months.
That's what you're looking at, kind of minimum.
That's right. I mean, it tells you one of two things. Either how much to pay for the property, or if you already own it, how much you need to be charging for rent.
Plus, or how much to get for it and how much you get.
That's exactly right. How much you got invested in it.
So this is where that's what I was thinking.
Does that formula make sense for everybody? All right, so let's go back to your worksheet here. The last two questions are gross rent multiplier questions, and then we'll be done with all the valuation math. It says Travis purchases a duplex, and that's the only tricky thing about this question at all. That word duplex. Because that means there are how many units here? Two of them. That's exactly right. Travis purchases a duplex in which each unit rents for $980 per month. Assuming he wishes to stay within a gross rent multiplier of 100, what should he pay for the property? Well, we looked at that formula. And when we looked at it, we had gross rent multiplier on the bottom. And they told us they wanted us to stay within 100, so we put 100 there. And we know it rents for $980 a month, but how many units do we have?
2.
Times 2. So total rent is $1,960. Could we just multiply 100 times $1,960 to get what we should pay for the property?
Yes.
Absolutely. That's all there is to it. So 1960 times 100 would be $196,000 we'd be willing to pay for that property. Because if we pay $196,000, we know we can get our money back in how many months? 100 months.
If you won't get it back quicker, you can raise the rent.
And if we want to get it back quicker, we can raise the rent, or we can pay less for the property. Lowball the offer, pay less for the property. That's exactly right. There's a couple ways to improve that gross rent multiplier. All right, then do number 22, and when I see that, you're out of here for today. Show it to me on your way.
This one, should I take?
And Unless you just specifically want me to walk you.
Just want to make sure I do. I went to please, I do something.
Like that? It's that easy. As long as you know the formula, those are that easy, right? So you should hope you get like 10 of those on the test.
Yeah.
You won't. You will see one of them, but here's the thing. It's one of those things you can't logic your way through it. If you don't know the formula, you will miss the question. You know, so you really have to memorize that formula, for sure.
Study this stuff.
Yeah, right. You gotta know the formulas.
Appreciation. Rent multiplier.
The whole page. It's just the whole
Study
page.
this stuff.
Somebody asked me a couple weeks ago, what does that really know for your hand? I said, look, as long as you know everything I've said, you'll be fine.
Would you